Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we're back again with another podcast. Those I can see on screen with me today, I'm not sitting opposite, but right next to Hamad Bhai. From yesterday's hefty, heavy, educational, historical context to the 7th October and the Palestinian conflict that's taking place on the land of Palestine.
And international law.
And international law. Highly, highly educational. If you've missed that episode, I can't commend enough for people to go back and listen to that breakdown. But as we promised in the closing comments, that we will have a part 2, that we will extend further discussions. And today's discussion will be about what happened straight after 7th of October, the impact we've seen, and then hitting on to Islamophobia. Another buzzword on social media, many confusions out there. Still, we have problems in defining and legislating Islamophobia. But these discussions we'll have on my panel on my right hand side. On the other screen you'll see now, we have Imam Sab from the University Chaplain. I wanted him particularly on. Imam Sab, with your experience that you've had with students highlighting cases and scenarios of Islamophobia, how Muslims have been targeted, questioned, and particularly in the context of post 7th of October. Bilal Bhai, another very good returning panelist. We had a podcast earlier this month with him as well, and from I think last year, quite active with us. This year he's a bit busy with work, but I wanted Bilal Bhai on because of his extensive experience in different work environments, of course coming from an entrepreneur and business background. We want to hear from his influence, his impact, maybe his experiences post 7th October. So, Imam Sab, let's start with yourself. Islamophobia, and before we start to dig into the legalities and where we stand today, how far do you think it stems back? Where do you see the origins of this?
Assalamu alaikum, Mawli, hope you're well. I hope this is going to be a really honest discussion between ourselves as brothers. But there's something I always do when I give a khutbah about Islamophobia. Any student who's been in a khutbah of mine in November, which is Islamophobia Awareness Month, will know the tafsir of Surah Al-Lahab. So I'll throw the question back to you, Imam Sab. Do you think Islamophobia is a new phenomenon? Hatred of, let's say a very base definition. Have people not liked the religion of Islam only in the modern times?
See, rightly already put, I mean, it's not a modern phenomenon at all. There are several ayat in the Quran that allude to the fact that, what's the ayahs coming to mind, that they want to blow out the light of the nur of Allah. لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. But يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ. They want to burn out the light of Hidayah بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ by blowing. The literal example given is like you blow on a candle and they think it's that easy. But that shows automatic, already within the ayah is telling you that it was never liked. There was always going to be an opposition. And if you look at the life of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right from the go, we know that his dawah program started in 3 steps. It was first the family, then it was family friends, then it was قُمِ اللَّيْلَ قَلِيلًا, then it was وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, then يَا أَيُّهَا الْمُدَّثِّرْ قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ. Then when this ayah came, فَأَنذِرْ وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, then he went on Jabal Abi Qubays. Then once he steps on Jabal Abi Qubays, now it's the communal da'wah taking place now. And as soon as that takes place, everyone comes together to Jabal Abi Qubays, and hence leading to what you described, the Surah Lahab taking place, where Islam was never liked by any community, because قُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. Whenever haqq came, then falsehood always oppressed, always retaliated. There was going to be aggression, there was going to be conflict, there was going to be friction. And that friction 1400 years ago was not called Islamophobia. It was just that natural hate and aggression towards the message of haqq. And hence why we have the Surah Lahab, like you were mentioning. And I've actually never thought of Surah Lahab in the way that you've just mentioned it. that Surah Lahab could be used to highlight Islamophobia stemming back 1400 years.
Whenever I would read the first thing I remember being young, you read a surah and you think Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. The question I have is, who's this Abu Lahab? And Allah curses him. He is cursed. So you go back and read. Very early you realize there is no doubt that Rasulullah was of such character that he was beloved. Even the people who were against him loved him. It wasn't about him. He was honourable, he was trustworthy, he was just, that was the difficult part, because someone that was so beloved to a people was bringing something that was just against their very nature. And so this idea of blowing out the candle is because, what were the arguments? It wasn't about him. Allah sent the best of creation. Allah sent the best of mankind who will and has ever walked this earth to give this beautiful message, so we couldn't ever argue with the vessel. So there's no issue with him. What's the problem then? Well, we can't do anything that our forefathers didn't do. That was the first common argument. Then it was, well, if we do this, then we have to stop some of our habits, our practices. Islam is a fundamental system of everything. Sharia encompasses every aspect of a human being's life. Immorality, financial matters, the way we deal with human beings, the hierarchy, who's better than one another. And when Abu Lahab asked him, when Rasulullah was in, so the first time he cursed Rasulullah, Tabulak. Then he was in the house of Rasulullah. He gathered them all. Remember, like you said, he did the house party, gathered them. And what did Abu Lahab ask him? Muhammad, what will I get if I get this religion? He said, you will get what everyone else gets, the mercy of Allah and a place in Jannah. I am better than all these people. I have the wealth, I have the high status, I'm a nobleman. You want me to be like everybody else? The equality that Rasulullah brought to the earth, this beautiful message, was not able to be taken by the people who were naturally would fight, would argue, and they would, idol worship, and it was just against their very nature. And so Islamophobia, I can accept. It's not about the human beings. I don't necessarily think someone hates me for being a Muslim, but they just hate what we bring. They hate what we stand for. And that's very dangerous. That's very, very scary, because the anger is against an idea, and the idea that we as Muslims hold so close to our very hearts. And I think that's why it's so scary, Islamophobia. It's a very real thing.
Read through the passages of history, 1400 years of history, wherever Islam has gone and the message was spread, there was always, it wasn't the people that were hated, it was a message. And we're talking about the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. I mean, we were mentioning as well, look, the hijrah took place because of Islamophobia. But yet when the hijrah is taking place, people still have left their entrustments with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's Sadiq, he's Amin, Jabab al-Qubays, and we have other scenarios in the Seerah when Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam gathered the community and said, if I told you that there's an army behind this,
would you believe me?
Behind the mountain, would you believe me? Yes, you're Sadiq, I mean, you've never lied. So then I'm telling you that Allah is one. Believe in the message that I give you as well. So Islamophobia has always been there. Him being exiled from the city of his birthplace of Makkah for 3 years, having to eat grass and nothing, survived on absolutely nothing.
What did you say, Imam? So repeat that. He had to eat grass.
Grass, yeah.
Did we not hear something about this yesterday, Hamad Bhai? People eating grass for who they are.
Yes, absolutely. And their beliefs and the way of their life and who they are and what they stand for. History repeats itself, as we hear time and time again.
Allahu Akbar. So this has always been there. Him being forced to leave from the city of Makkah, Hijrah, because of Islamophobia. Him being targeted. So as soon as he settled in Medina Munawwara, he's not allowed to settle, because within the 12 months, Badr take place.
So Badr, and what day is it, Imam?
Tonight, also so the night of Badr as well. So straight away, that happens to destabilize the Muslims that are trying to settle in Medina, away from the oppression of Makkah, but they're not allowed to. Again, Islamophobia. The year after Battle of Uhud, Islamophobia. Look at Khandaq, where 10,000, which was the biggest army Arabia had ever put together, came charging at Medina Munawwara. All communities came together. The Mushrikeen and the other places where everyone came together. Islamophobia.
To wipe out Islam.
They
wanted that message gone. They wanted it finished. They didn't want the message. They weren't happy to receive it. But Allah protected His deen.
Don't you think Islamophobia has, like, at least the expression of and implementation of Islamophobia has changed from, we talk about, the Prophet ﷺ, who, in this day and age, we can argue about if the idea, the authenticity, the credibility, all of these things. But as you were saying, he was Sadiq Amin, right? So the medium was the message. And if you, even then at that time, did not accept the message, it's very unlikely you'll accept it.
So we're always going to be on a slippery slope down, because no one can ever emulate Rasul. We can only aspire to be part of what he was walking in his sunnah. And so I guess it was always going to be a hard task from that moment on.
Of course.
Sure.
That being established, now let's bring it to more modern context now. It's always been there. It always will be there. But now we have laws. We have international laws. Now we consider ourselves to be at a time in the human age that we live in civilized countries. Those that pioneer what they consider to be pioneering human rights and international laws, and we're abiding by these. Post 7th October. Now this is where we really want the meat of this discussion. Where do we see ourselves, Hamad Bhai?
I think primarily the concept or the idea that we live in developed countries with organized legal systems for protection for all. We discussed it yesterday, and I said even yesterday that the law is written on a piece of paper, and if the law is not implemented uniformly across the board, irrespective of religion, color or creed, then it isn't worth the paper it's printed on. And what then prevents the law being applied uniformly is political will. The framework is there. The political will has to be present. Where do we go from here? We have to work harder to ensure that political will is established. We have to make sure that education of the masses, we have to educate and we have to communicate to make sure that the message is understood. Because what we cannot say is that there is a higher degree of protection for a particular group, whether it is Muslims or Christians or Jews, if you're living or even the non-believers. If you live in a land where you say everybody's equal, then the law has to apply equally to everyone. The protection has to be equal. We then, obviously in the UK, we have the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech. That has to be balanced. And one of the arguments which we previously had, and I think this debate needs to be developed further, is freedom of expression, freedom of speech, but with responsibility. And these laws have to be reviewed again. And one of the fundamental aspects as far as Islamophobia is concerned, which is missing at the moment, is an actual legal agreed definition of Islamophobia which can then be applied uniformly. And again, unfortunately, it's not for lack of effort, it's lack of political will, which is why we've not been able to get a legal definition which can be used for enforcement purposes. And one of the, in my view, when I look at it, and I think, why is it that after so many years of consistently highlighting the problems of Islamophobia, why is it that we still do not have a definition? Is it because there is absence of legal minds? Is it because there hasn't been enough debate? Is it because we lack funding to create that space for debate? And it's none of that. It is actually political will which is missing. And you have to then ask, why is that political will?
So let's wonderful, I think that's a very good talking point, because you look at, let me ask you a question. Do you like the term Islamophobia? You're Muslim, we're all Muslims here. Where is Islamophobia? Do you think it encompasses what it should be, Islamophobia? Do you think it hits it in on the head, just the word itself? Do you think it's got enough clout?
No, look, I think if you look at it from why is a word created? It is to give a definition of something, to compartmentalize, something.
So where does the word
easier to understand?
So where did the word come from? So there's different reports, but generally it's accepted that in 1997 the Runnymede Trust did a flagship report, and they coined this term. They credit themselves with. So if you do research, Runnymede Trust 1997 coined the term Islamophobia.
Okay.
The term was used previously in the 50s in some French there's some kind of literature about it, but really in the UK the term was widely used after this Runnymede Trust in 97. Islamophobia challenge for us all, and using this word and kind of giving a loose definition of what Islamophobia was. And I guess since then it's been challenging to kind of get what Islamophobia is. So we can't really hit the nail on the head of how to say what it is in a sentence or two. So now, indulge me for a second, my brothers. Let's bring it to a modern context. Let's say we don't really know definitions, but let me ask you, while I'm talking here, this is something I do in a khutbah, I say listen to what I'm saying and ask yourselves, at what point do you think this is Islamophobic?
Okay.
So let's start with a very basic thing. You're at work, and a stranger asks you, why Muslim women are oppressed in Islam. Okay. A colleague says, you're always praying, do you get any work done? Say hello. Your manager asks you what you think about what ISIS are doing in the world and if you think it's okay.
Okay.
At uni, a lecturer questions your loyalty and says that UK systems are better than others, aren't they? And if you don't agree, maybe you get reported to Prevent. A group start running for political office and they say Muslims are trying to implement Sharia law and we must impose a ban on the building of mosques. A leader of a country, a free world, says we have a real Muslim problem and we need a Muslim ban until we figure out what the hell is going on. The Daily Mail and the Express in the media have headlines saying that 1 in 5 Muslims support jihad and they stir up hatred. In a job interview, you're told you probably won't fit in. A Muslim footballer misses a penalty and comments like, where's your Allah now? Are said. A Muslim girl walks down the street. She spat at and her headscarf is pulled off. A Muslim cardiac surgeon is walking home or walking to the masjid. He gets stabbed in the neck and he's told, this is what you've done. This is for what you've done.
No.
A Muslim man in his 70s, Muhammad Salim, may Allah give him Jannat al-Firdaus, stabbed on the way back from Salah. His family find him, his daughter, dead in the streets. 3 to 5 million Uyghur Muslims are in re-education camps in China and are told it's genocide by many sources. You're also told Islamophobia isn't a real word, it's just a word used to shut down real criticism of our religion and we have freedom of speech. At what point, brothers, while I was talking, did you start to think, alarm bells, that's Islamophobic? I would argue every single one.
Every single one of them, absolutely.
But why do we have to be from there to there? Where's our protection? And the law at the moment is dull. The law is giving Muslims no protection at all. And this is a red herring. They won't pick a definition. And so Hamad, I ask you, APPG definition, Hafiz Saab, you looked into this as well.
Yeah. I was looking into the 2018 APPG report. First, what's the legal context and weight that an APPG report holds? And has there been any follow-up? Is there any potential follow-up?
So
Which direction do we go in?
APPG reports are advisory.
They're not binding.
They're not binding.
So an APPG report is an all-party parliamentary group report.
Yeah.
So it's advisory. So a number of parliamentarians would come together. They would look at the evidence and they would then
do road
provide
shows.
their advice.
Yes.
And that could take a number of years before the advice comes out. And then it is shared with the cabinet and various other departments. So this would have been shared with the Home Office. And then discussions should then start from there. But as I said before, it is not for lack of effort, and it is certainly not for lack of legal minds to come up with a definition. It's lack of political will. The environment, so politics, if you look at politics is the creation of a narrative. Every politician relies on a narrative.
It has to be built up.
It has to be built up, and so it takes time to build up. Now, there are certain events which took place which gave rise to Islamophobia over the past 24 years, 25 years. And one of the biggest events which gave rise to Islamophobia in the previous 25 years was 9/11. As a consequence of 9/11, there are various reports all over the world where Sikhs who have a beard and a turban were attacked because people thought they were Muslims. that tells you the ignorance of the people that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So the issue then is, how do these narratives build up, and how do we change those narratives? But again, in order to change the narratives, you require the political will for people to understand that there is a real problem, and this problem needs addressing head on. And in my view, from what I see, the primary factor which is missing in all of this is the political will to actually address the issue.
So
I'll give you an example. So the Conservative Party, there was a chap called Professor Swaran Singh. He was the head of, or he was heading the human rights, human rights, UK's Equality and Human Rights panel. He did a report into the Conservative Party, who've now been in power for over a decade, and he found the overwhelming majority discrimination which existed in the Conservative Party was anti-Muslim. So if that is the case, and Professor Singh's report is accurate, and you've got a party which has been in power for over a decade, and their biggest issue of discrimination is anti-Muslim, how can you expect that party to take any positive steps?
So I think what you're alluding to, let's get to the point. So let's just first say the definition. So for those of the viewers that don't know, the APPG definition was very simply, they define it as rooted in racism, and it's a type of racism. So Islamophobia is rooted in racism, and it's a type of racism. So they call it racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. That goes to the idea of someone who looks like a Muslim. So on hearing that, a bit confusing.
Too vague.
Bit vague, very vague. Bit wordy. Jumps to racism.
Muslimness. How do you define Muslim?
Then you get to all these problems. And this is one of the biggest problems with the idea of Muslims. Because people say, I don't have a problem with Muslims. One of my best friends is Muslim. I play snooker with him. I go out with him. But what he believes is a bit dodgy. I just don't like what they think about. And that's what makes you start to think, well, do you not actually like my religion? I'll be honest to all of you here. If someone doesn't like what Allah and His messengers have sent, guess what? That's between you and Allah. You don't have to. Allah yahdi man yasha. Alhamdulillah that Allah has guided us. This is a gift, I believe, it's a blessing. Islam is a gift from Allah to insan. So it's clear that Allah will seal the hearts of people and stuff. So not everyone's going to come to Islam, right? We know that. It's not the problem I have that they don't like our religion or our beliefs. Or even within Islam, people have problems with why do this happen, and why do you do this in Islam? It's when it starts to affect me. It's when, because of what I believe, you start to abuse me. I start to get asked stupid questions. I start to get treated differently from someone else. When I'm going to a football match and I'm just having a normal time, I'm just standing there, and someone walks past me and says, "Oh look, it's Mo Salah. Where's your bomb? Where's your rucksack? Where's your rucksack, mate?" Boom. And I say, "Excuse me, what did you just say?" I said, "Where's your rucksack?" with even more arrogance. That's what I don't want. Don't like Islam. Not got a problem with it. We'll talk about that. But don't use it against me to feel that you have any right to do what you want to me. Dehumanize me.
But I think that's linking back to your point about political will. The fact that the general public sees that there is no political will to address this issue gives them even more arrogance and confidence to then be expressively show Islamophobic behaviours.
Well, just to be fair, the Labour Party have adopted, am I correct, Ahmad, by the official definition? It's the Conservative Party who haven't adopted the definition of Islamophobia, and this APPG report came out in 2018, so they haven't been in power yet, Labour. But am I correct in saying that the Conservative government have still not adopted it? Many councils have, but not all councils have. Institutions have, but most institutions haven't. And I'm sad to say that most institutions in Manchester have not got a formal definition of what Islamophobia is. So when someone brings a problem, when a student brings a problem, when you're at work and you have a problem, how do they know what it is? How can they call it Islamophobia if they haven't got a definition of Islamophobia? That's a massive problem.
Indeed, and this is why I was saying before that the definition has to be agreed upon and then set in law. Because once it's set in law, it can then be applied. And again, it has to be through political will. And there is a lack of that political will. One of the other things, if you analyze of the previous 25 years, and I highlighted 9/11 on purpose, is because immediately after 9/11, the environment and the political environment was created in such a way, and the narrative was formed in such a way that anything that happened as Muslims, if you were ever on a TV screen, the first question that you have to do is apologize and go on the defensive. So when you are starting any discussion or any debate from a defensive position, it's difficult then to turn that discussion. And the media played a big role and continues to play a big role in all of this. And the media is supposed to be there for factual reporting, for doing its due diligence. And unfortunately, again, if you look at it, the due diligence is missing, and that exists all the way up to today. The due diligence is not done properly. The media reports and sensationalizes in many instances the reports which are either published or aired on TV, and those days of where the credibility of the media existed in itself, for example, the BBC even was one of the most credible news channels in the world, but unfortunately they've had their own fair share of problems over the years. And all of these tie into the same problems: the lack of political will, the lack of awareness, not reporting anything the way it should be reported. So for example, if I reported something and I said, for example, there was an incident where a Muslim had committed something. If you said a Islamist extremist, straight away you are labeling the whole religion. If it was somebody, a non-Muslim, and you said a youth, just the word the youth, or a lone ranger, and all of a sudden the narrative changes, the impressions change, the powers of persuasion that there is a real problem change, and it is selective use of language which is a big problem in the media, and similarly in politics as well.
Well, just to be clear to people, it's no surprise what Hamad Bhai is saying, because even in 2021 there was a study which looked at, and it's crazy, over 48,000 online articles, 5,500 broadcast clips from 34 different media organizations that mention Islam and Muslims between 2018 and 2019. And the study found that over 60% of articles that portrayed Islam were negative, and 1 in 5 associated the term and the faith with extremism or terrorism. The word Islamist and Islamism have caused so much destruction and hatred for Muslims since this term was coined. And it's funny because there's all these terms used for us, but no term used to protect us. And it's quite sad. And so before we even move on to the modern day context of what's happened since October 7th and how Islamophobia has just got so much worse, we really look at the fact that over the last 20 years we've been kind of sleepwalking into the idea that Muslims have just been easy game, been fair game. Everyone can say what they want about Muslims. It's okay. When someone attacks a Muslim or attacks Islam, it's, well, we're not saying anything about them, it's just their religion we don't like. Oh, it's freedom of speech, you have to accept that. And I went through that whole list of what we all thought was Islamophobia, but does anyone get in trouble for those kind of things? Is there any consequences for those kind of actions? We just see people saying what they want, and I think a huge part of it has to be that the law is not protecting us, and it's horrific, and we need to do something about that as a community.
And there's also a lack of reporting as well, isn't it?
100%, that's a massive issue. That's a massive issue. Yeah.
If we had been more active in our reporting of these cases, we could potentially speed up the process, couldn't we?
I hope so, Hafsab. I really hope so. Look, Hamad Bhai and me have sat in many a meeting together separately and come together. I've sat in institutional meetings. You've had mosque meetings about all the hate that masajid get. And let's be real, these are real disgusting things. Things sent to the masajid,
yes.
Disgusting comments made, graffiti, fire, set on fire. These attacks happening to our institutions, Muslims being, harassed and harangued.
Sorry to jump in. I was just reading a stat earlier today that 90% of the mosques in the UK have experienced some form of hate crime.
That doesn't surprise me, and I think it's much more prevalent. And again, I think as far as reporting is concerned, and I think there is a huge amount of underreporting. And one of the reasons I believe that there is a lack of underreporting is because there is a perception within the public. So all of the examples that you were alluding to earlier, and you were asking these questions, at what point does this amount to Islamophobia? And we said all of those questions amount to Islamophobia. People seem to sort of think, if I report this, nothing's going to happen. And people also need to understand that currently, because there is no definition of Islamophobia, the only thing we can rely on is for any reporting to be of a hate crime. And the hate crime, the way the reporting system would work is that it is not looked at objectively. So if I say that I have been at the receiving end of hatred or a hate crime, it is not that another person would objectively consider that to be hate. It's what I perceive, and it is the perception of the person on the receiving end. If I perceive something to be hatred and part of hate crime, the police will record it as hate crime, even though the end result could be absolutely nothing, but it would still be recorded. And I think as a community, Muslims, the underreporting is also as a consequence of that we think, I have to be strong. I have to show that I am strong and I have to weather this, and so it's not a big deal.
They don't want to portray themselves as victims. I think that's absolutely a huge deal. For many for too long, Muslims have not wanted to portray themselves as victims, as being victimized. And I hate the word victim, but sadly, a lot of people have been victim to Islamophobia, because that's the legal term we use when you talk to the police, when you report these things. You are a victim of a crime, and I guess there is this idea that we'll just weather it. People came here, so not that bad. It's not as bad as France, is it? Look what's happening in Germany, look what's happening. So we've had this idea that, it's not as bad as it can be. But that's not the way I want to live. I live in this country. I want this to be the best country for all. And that includes Muslims. And I feel like Muslims haven't been protected. The definition is a problem. Underreporting is a problem. Our community don't have the trust of the police. I think I've said this many times, and I'm not scared to say it again. And I think there needs to be a lot of work done with the authorities and our communities, especially the youth. Young Muslim men especially don't feel that they can go to the police. Why? But let's go back 20 years ago, after 9/11 Hamadabai. You know very well, like I do, I was stopped and searched several times after 9/11. There was a very weird thing that happened. Islam, and there might be some of our listeners thinking 9/11, what's that? 2011, the
Twin Towers.
Twin Towers. And I'm working with people in university and they don't even know what, they weren't alive. And it was such a pivotal moment in history for me, because I saw, even the next day when I went back into college, people were talking about Islam like I've never heard before. No one was interested. It felt like a microscope was all of a sudden on Islam and Muslims. And then obviously the advent of social media, internet was, social media wasn't really out, it was just the internet, and people talking, and then the media reports. Islam was under the microscope for the first time. People scrutinizing what these people are doing in our countries. What are this little group of people doing? What are they about? What are these mosques? What's happening in them? And I think, alhamdulillah, the Muslim community have done so much to opening our doors to try and welcome people and show them, but it just doesn't seem to be enough. It just doesn't seem to be enough.
There's one thing good that you mentioned 9/11, because what 9/11 did was gave the general population an idea that Islam somehow inspires violence, right? And I think, touching back on not reporting incidents, sure, partly it's because we don't want to be considered victims, but I think also partly it's because we don't want to report an incident that feeds into that narrative where, like, as recent as a few weeks ago, outside mosques, certain violent events have been happening. So by reporting those incidents, right, which I do think we should, what we're only doing, or at least one of the viewpoints is, that is feeding into the narrative that wherever Muslims unite or get together, it somehow inspires violence.
What they do. I think that's very important to accept. And I think it's hard for me to sit here and say, because even thinking about it makes me feel quite sad. Muslim young men especially were criminalized for a long time. We had control orders. We had things like, stop and search increase for young Muslim men. We had raids on houses. We had covert recordings. We had people going into the masajid and secretly recording khutbahs. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are things that were happening for 15, 20 years. Why would we trust the police? How would you? When you know that a group of people who are supposed to support you And I understand why the trust is gone. And it's quite sad to sit here as a Muslim and say, you know, our community have been let down for many years by an institution that need to be protecting us, but so for so many years we're watching us as the problem. We were the issue. We were the ones that were in the wrong. And it was attached to something that we all love, our deen.
Yeah.
Islam, for the Muslim, is at the center of our world. It's our soul, it's our heart. And anything against that is very sad, because that's the thing that we wear the most as a Muslim. And so why would we not not report? Why would we report when the first thing you do when you report? It's a very simple incident. One of our students was driving, and he had a bit of, some guy had road rage, caught in front of him. Whatever happened, because the guy got out of his car, started banging on the window and screaming at him, "You get back home to your country, you Muslims, you're all the same." He was shaking up. He sent me a voice, and I said, "Phone the police. Phone the police." First question he gets asked: "So what did you do then? What did you do? You must have done something. This is the way you're spoken to." And I think there's a lack of trust, a breakdown, but we must need to report. I think what we need to tell people is we're trying to rebuild that trust with the police. Not everyone is a bad egg. And mashallah, Hamad Bhai, I know you particularly have been doing a lot of work in Manchester to have meetings, and we have tried, but I still don't think we're there yet. But I think we're starting to get on a road where we need to start working with the authorities. And you had an incident recently, and you worked with the police, and for the sound, they were quite good.
And again, I think it's part of the learning curve for us, but it's also part of the learning curve for the police. We have to engage better. They have to understand our perspective better, which can only happen by dialogue. We shouldn't shy away from difficult conversations. We shouldn't shy away from pointing out when things go wrong or things we don't like. So in the most recent events in Palestine from the 7th of October onwards, and we had the protests here in Manchester, and if you remember, we had the likes of Suella Braverman creating a divisive environment again. And it was the political rhetoric that was it was thrown out everywhere, and again the media hyped it to another level, and it created unnecessary tensions within the communities in Manchester and Greater Manchester. And you would recall that there were protests and there were chants which were being targeted, that these chants are in some way anti-Semitic. And at the time we were obviously concerned, because Manchester has always had a very good history of unified communities. In general, we've lived together with everybody without any problem. It's been really, really well. I think we were concerned that we did not want that fabric of unity to break down. And we were reaching out to the police at the time to say that, look, there's all sorts of these things flying around on social media and media itself, on the mainstream media. Where does the police stand with this? Because we did not want at the time for a particular incident to spark further divisions, although Suella Braverman and others like her who had a similar mindset, in my view, tried their utmost in every possible way to try and create further divisions, further problems, which would then give rise to further hatred between the communities. And it was extremely, extremely sad to see that in this day and age, that we have people at that level of government who, instead of acting with responsibility, were actually part and parcel of the problem rather than the solution.
What drives that kind of behavior, like to separate society and sections within society further? Like, what is the benefit that someone like Suella Braverman is getting?
So you're asking essentially, why do people want to divide? Why do people want to sow hatred? I've got a few answers, but what do you think, Hamad Bhai? Because I've got a few answers in my head. Why do you think people want to sow hate and division?
I think a number of reasons, and you've all heard divide and conquer. That's the very traditional simplified version. The other reason is because on this particular occasion, after October the 7th, it was the Muslim community again, and the target was the Muslim community, and you have to create the boogeyman, and the boogeyman then after 9/11 was going to be after 9/11 we had 7/7, and then we had the 7th of October, and all of these, there has to be a boogeyman. Now when you do that, there are you divert the attention away from something which is actually staring you blind in the face. So right now in the UK, for example, around all of this, the Conservative Party has been struggling in domestically, and you've got the cost of living crisis going up. There's numerous issues with unemployment, etc. And to now move the discussion away from all of that, if you create something or you spark another debate which is likely to take hold, and the media will give it that attention,
Polarizing.
and it will polarize the discussion, absolutely, and that's the right word for it, then it gives importance to something else. So that's another reason why it is done, to divert the attention from something which would otherwise be at the forefront of the discussions. The third thing I think is that some people just enjoy having further polarizations and divisions within communities, because it is part and parcel of their thinking and their makeup, because the more divided you are, the less you think you have in common. The more scare you create, and you think, oh, them, I want to stay away from them. And that division, in fact, what people realize when you have dialogue with people is there is more that unites us than that divides us. So there are multiple reasons on multiple levels, and some could be more recently we had the chap who financed the Conservative Party with the 10 million.
What did he say? Remind us of what he said.
The comments he made about Diane Abbott, what did he say? He said,
when I see her, it makes me hate all black people, all black, and she should be shot.
Yes, absolutely. Now, if you have people like that financing you, and people like that providing you with huge amounts of money, and you play to their tune, you're basically saying, I'm with you, give me more money, and we have the similar mindset, we have similar policies, and you're playing to their tunes, and part of the reason could be financial motivation for it.
I think this is touching on your earlier point about lack of political will. Like, there's two things. There's probably a financial motivation to be, at least from an ideology perspective, in line with the authorities and the individuals funding, right, your political campaigns. And there's another of what has happened in the past to people that have tried to stand for the right? Like, if you take the example of Jeremy Corbyn, right, being let's just say a lone ranger in the political world, standing up for Palestine and what was happening against the Palestinians. If you see how he was treated and how he was literally ousted from his own party, no politician that's serious about a political career would ever want to repeat that kind of activity or make a stand for Palestinians again.
So what you're saying is you make an example of someone.
Exactly.
And if you make an example of someone, you're basically sending a message to others that if we can do this to him, we can do that to you.
Absolutely.
Is that
absolutely.
Right?
This is it.
I want to say, just going back to the reasons, Ahmad, but I can't disagree with what you're saying. Or the ring idea that it's a smokescreen, failings of this inept government since the start of the last prime minister being elected. We've had 3 prime ministers since 2019, which is completely outrageous.
Unelected prime
unelected and so you look at failings in COVID, the housing crisis, people struggling every single day. There needs to be a cause, and it's a smokescreen, huge problem. But I think there's one thing I would add to that very solemn list. I think there are people who genuinely hate Islam. I think I go back to the point that, guess what, there are people who genuinely hate Islam, and that's very scary to be in a country, to be in a world where increasingly the whipping boy seems to be the Muslims, where the rise of right wing equals the rise of hating Muslims. And I think this is a real problem, and we have to take it seriously, because if the Muslim community don't take it seriously, let me tell you, nobody else is going to take it seriously. We need to be the ones to fight for a definition. We need to ones to report. We need to call it out wherever we see it. And so now I want to bring the context onto a modern one. I think we all accept Islamophobia has always existed. That Islamophobia, whether or not it's a term we all like or not, it's there. The definition, we don't know, but we need one. So now let's move to the events of 7th of October. Islamophobia has always been there, but I'm going to say this as an opening gambit. I have never seen in the last few months anything like I've seen with Muslims in my whole lifetime. I've never seen anything like it, and I think we need to dissect the problems that have occurred since October the 7th.
Again, I think so let's have a look at what's happened again. So I will say that what is happening now in some way is synonymous to the way Muslims were labelled after 9/11. In order to now create that narrative, you have to dehumanize the Muslim population. You have to label the Muslim population as all of them are hate marchers. All of them are extremists. All of them. And as soon as you start to do all of that, you dehumanize the whole of the religion, irrespective of race. You dehumanize anything that you stand for as Muslims. And in fact, if you recall, if you went to any of the marches, I went to a few of them, nobody could have said that they were all Muslims. In fact, majority of the people
were non-Muslim.
Yeah, they were non-Muslims.
Were non-Muslims. Yeah. And I met numerous, people who were, Jews, and I had dialogue with them, had discussions, with them. A lot of my own personal friends are from Jewish, faith, and but as soon as people who are either cut off from reality or want to change the reality, the landscape, you try and dehumanize. And it was the same thing after the 7th of October. Numerous Israeli politicians as well have made comments that we are fighting human animals. You remember the quote from Netanyahu of Amalek. You remember the cutting off of water, food, and medicine. But that didn't just stop with the politicians in Israel. We had our own Keir Starmer at LBC who said, yes, absolutely, that the Israelis were...
They do have that right.
They have the right.
They do have that right.
And in fact, it was such a shame, and I remember hearing his remarks.
One understatement of the year. Such a shame.
To hear a lawyer say that, it was a kick in the gut. I was thinking.
I want to pause you there, Malbai, because I want to come on to this. But I want to because this is a very important part to come back onto the politics. How long have we got left?
Sorry, could I just add one point?
Go on.
Just a quick one in regards to you were saying how. People, because of the media, the narrative, they've been given this kind of message about all Muslims are like this, right? And I just, when you were saying this, one thing that came to my mind is I think social media has played a massive role in that, because the addiction or the increase in usage and reliance on social media for all social interactions means that we socialize with each other face to face a lot less, which means that what we're actually relying on when it comes to news and what's going on in the world is what we're seeing on a piece of screen, which makes it much easier to brainwash you and pass you a certain narrative than in an environment where people are talking to each other.
Well, I've got a question first. Why is this a Muslim issue? Honestly, I have to say, I find that the most Islamophobic part of this whole discussion. An event.
You're talking about the 7th of
what's happening? Yes. Yeah. Why is it a Muslim issue?
Well, it's not.
Well, it shouldn't be, but it's become one.
It never has been, and
but it's become one.
Well, it's creation of narratives, isn't it? And in my view, and we spent a whole hour yesterday on this. It's actually an issue of law. It is a lack of political will, lack of implementation of law, lack of uniform application of the law. And this is why even yesterday we were discussing this, that we are where we are because of that. And I go back to what I was saying before. To hear a lawyer, Keir Starmer, someone who has practiced law, he's not new to law, he's practiced law, he's led government departments at the highest level. For someone of his ilk come on LBC and say the Israel has the right to cut off water and food and medicine, is such a disgrace to the legal fraternity. And I remember I was thinking to myself, I can't believe I'm even hearing this. It was such a disbelief. I actually had to play it again and again, and I remember for 2 continuous days in a row I played that again and again. And then you had the likes of Emily Thornberry and David Lammy, and all of them reinforcing the same point. And you think,
Well, Owen
really,
Jones,
is this really happening?
This is the political point, and you see people like Owen Jones saying that they've cancelled their Labour membership because they just can't vote for anyone who has that kind of view, and that's a huge issue for the Muslim community on the upcoming elections, about political allegiances. But before then, I still want to delve into this idea that why has it become a Muslim problem? We see all these themes about you don't have to be Muslim to say what's happening in parts of the world are wrong. You just have to be human. I don't think this is a Muslim issue. Not everyone in Gaza are Muslim. Not everyone who lives in Israel are Jewish or Muslim. There's Christians, there's non-believers there. I've been to Aqsa, I've been to Palestine, I've been to Jerusalem. And I think that this framing of it as a Muslim versus Jewish issue is deeply distressing to me as a Muslim, because this is not about Islam or Muslims. This is a completely separate issue that's been going on, as you described in last podcast, for over 100 years. And we can even go back further than that. But at any point in that framing did you mention the word Islam or about Muslims? But it's now becoming a question about Islam. It's these people, they're Muslim. And so let's go back to what's happening in the UK. So we have an event. We have then a counter event. And then people protest. Very quickly, the protest turned into Muslims. You see a rave of non-Muslims in there. You see people who are not Muslim. You think, wait, is it you blind? Is it just what you're seeing? Is it a colour? Is it clothes? They're not all Muslim. Then all of a sudden it becomes widening the definition of extremism. Then we're told that certain chants are now illegal, waving of a flag. All these things start to then become, very murky. We're all confused about what we are and what we aren't allowed to do. The right to assembly is a fundamental right. The right to protest is a fundamental right enshrined in law. But for some reason, when people who are perceived as Muslim want to do those same things, they're seen as dangerous, they're seen as extremist. And this is where Islamophobia has just completely blown up. And then you see people like Lee Anderson making comments about a Muslim mayor that, he's handed over the capital to his friends, the Islamists. That word again, Islamists. We want our country back. That they're stopping the country. Who's they? Do
you think that's because Muslims are the only group of society that have an identity and a belief system that's so different from everyone else within society?
No, it's not that different, is it?
No, I would disagree with it. I think the reason why the political elite, I think, reacted in the way that they did is because, in all honesty, I think it shook them beyond what they thought would happen. And I think they did not expect that the general public would come together. It wasn't just, it's not a Muslim issue, it's a humanitarian issue.
Yeah.
It's an issue where you've got over 2 million people now starving and having to eat grass and animal fodder just to try and stay alive. And for the government to or political elite to see that unity on that issue, that we do not stand for this and we will not support this. I don't think that's ever happened. And we have had protests in Manchester before, but never
not to that scale,
like this, not in these numbers, and not
continuous,
with this frequency.
Continually.
And I'm sure that if the situation continues, the protests will carry on, because humanity, it is within our nature as humans that when we see somebody suffering, we want to help. Anybody with any degree of humanity cannot even begin to see this or any atrocities of this type. And now, obviously, again, the problem is the narrative. And the political elite, I think, in my view, tried their best to create a narrative, to demonize the protests, which were peaceful. And if you went to even the protest in London, you've got hundreds of thousands of people coming together from all over the country, but in a very peaceful way, and they march, and they shout for the right. They shout for the rights of the Palestinians. They shout for humanity at large. Because don't forget, if it is happening there today, It could happen at another place tomorrow.
Exactly.
So this is training of even our generations to come, that look, as human beings, we will not stand for this. And I think primarily, the way the political elite reacted was because they were concerned, because they were losing the narrative, they were losing the political debate, they were losing the support of the public at levels I have never seen before in my lifetime. You could talk to anybody anywhere in the world, and I went to the States, I went to Canada, during this time. I traveled a few other countries in this time, and anybody and everybody you spoke to, during this time will tell you that it was a disgrace. It should never happen. There needs to be more that needs to be done to find a solution, because there has to be a solution. And that solution, as always said, even yesterday we were talking about, the solution is in the law. The law is very plain. It is applicability of the law uniformly by creating that political will. And now, as I said even yesterday, right at the end, all eyes are on the ICJ. And it is not the Muslims who are on trial. It is not the Jewish population which is on trial. What is on trial, in my view, at the ICJ is the very fabric of international law, and where we go from here will be determined by what happens.
Well, I just want to make it very clear to anyone who's not sure that cutting off people's water, electricity, aid, indiscriminately bombing people for over 5 months, and now we're all surprised that people are starving to death. Now we're all shocked that people aren't surviving. What world are we living in? And I guess at some point we have to hold ourselves to account. Humanity's failed.
Absolutely.
We failed. We should be ashamed of ourselves. And you look at images every day, you watch videos, you send them, you can't hide from them. And I watch, because and Hafsab, you'll know this, as people of faith, we welcome all peoples into our masajid. We do all these things, we try and build bridges, and you see these things happening, and what else can you do but just feel hopeless at this moment? And I think we need to talk a little bit about some of the things that have come out of this, but when you see the inhumanity, it is heartbreaking. And I know that in 5-10 years history will judge us very harshly. People looking back will say, how did we allow this to happen? How did the world stand by and watch 30,000 people get slaughtered, 17,000 children? As was said yesterday, 40,000 missing and 7,000 under rubble.
And these are obviously estimates. Nobody knows the real figures in this, and it's unbelievable that this happens. But it's something which if you remember the phrase "never again," what did that actually mean? It meant never again for anyone. It was for anyone. We saw this happening. We've seen this happen time and time again, and this needs to be dealt with at an international level. It's not, as I said, it's humanity. It's a question of humanity. And if you geographically just look at the Gaza Strip, you've got a strip of land. It's called a strip for a reason, because it is literally a strip. You've got over 2.3 million people who were then told to go to south because that was going to be the safe zone. Now you've got all of those people in a even smaller area of land and still being bombed. Was that by chance? Did those people just leave their homes and go to the south? They were actually told to go. They were told to go because that was going to be the safe zone. And they went and did what they were told, and they still find themselves in a position where they're continuously bombed. Children now starving, malnutrition, disease spreading. You've got lack of even water. People don't have a drop of water. This was not something which was a natural catastrophe. This was man-made. And as you rightly say, who in their right minds would have said, oh, I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know this could be the consequence. Everybody knew that this was going to be the consequence. And everybody who had any ounce of humanity was shouting from the top of their voices and making their voices heard, or their letters were clear that this is a catastrophe waiting to happen, and we must take a stand. We must stop this from happening. But unfortunately, to this day, the bombing hasn't stopped.
What does it say about our choices when it comes to voting for leaders? Because ultimately we do not have the authority to be able to make changes at that kind of a scale without the support of our leaders, right? And so when we see our leaders openly coming out and saying Israel or whoever it is right in the right to defend themselves by bombing innocent children in a safe zone, what more can we do? Like, what is the solution here? Because I feel there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of frustration, but as the general public, beyond what we're already doing, which is having an impact. We saw the recent UN resolution finally because the US decided not to veto. But I think beyond that, what more can we do?
I think it's very clear. We just want it to stop. Every single protest I've been on has been calling for one thing and one thing only: cease your fire.
Yeah.
Just stop. People are hurting. There is no doubt that everyone feels that they're somehow hurting more than the other. We have difficult conversations every single day, but all we're asking for is just stop. Just stop the killing, because the reality is this cannot go on. We can't kill each other into believing what the other believes. We can't murder our way out of a crisis. We have to stop at some point, and we have to start talking. And at this point, it seems very far off. But where are we going to end? Just killing? Hafizab, I want you to finish us with some wise words.
Before you do that, I think there's one other point I think is very, very important, and it sort of combines what you were saying, Bilal, by a greater, in addition to everything else that's happening, there's a great deal of responsibility with governments all around the world who have continued to supply weapons, who've continued to supply planes and parts of planes, etc., which are used. And at some point, this is going to stop, and it must, and it has to stop. And when it does, and there is a moment of pause, every government around the world which has supported the indiscriminate killing of children and women and elderly and men are going to should be and must be held accountable. Whether that happens in 6 months or 6 years or 10 years or 20 years, but it will happen, and it must happen. Otherwise, the very fabric of humanity, the very fabric of international humanitarian law will fall apart. And we can never, ever, ever say and dictate to anybody what they should and should not do. And I've always said, even from yesterday, everything that I said, I was saying even yesterday, the UK holds the greatest responsibility in the world on the state of the Palestinian people, because if it was not for the Balfour Declaration, if it wasn't for the breach of Article 22 of the League Covenant, as I was saying yesterday, the Palestinians would have their own state by the right of self-determination, which was promised to them, and the right was given to them. If it wasn't for that, the Palestinians would not be where they are. The UK holds the brunt of that responsibility over the past 100 odd years now, and we have to take a moral and ethical position on this. And only then we may, just may, begin to redeem some of the wrongs that have been done. So over to you.
Give us some wise words, Bismillah.
I think number one, I would again, touching on for what Ahmad Bhai just mentioned, is I would want all the viewers, if you've missed yesterday's podcast, to go back and watch the entire hour discussion where Ahmad Bhai breaks down in such easy way, in a chronological order from 1920 to where we are now, to understand the extent of the conflict, where it starts. Mabai mentioned that in the crux, in the core of this conflict, UK has played a huge role in where the Palestinians stand today. I think, Mabai, if I'm not wrong, we've mentioned political will. That term has been used so many times in today's podcast. What I'm feeling right now is there should be part 3, where we educate the masses on how we can build that political momentum. When we say political will, how we can build on that. Imam Sahib mentioned somewhere in the discussion about votes coming up. This year we're going to be voting. What rights do I have? What impact can I make? Can you make? Can Bilal Bhai, Imam Sahib, the live audience, and people that are watching, what right do you have? What impact can you play in making that political difference, which you mentioned that maybe these powers will be held accountable in 6 months, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years time. But I've got to play my role. So when now the votes are coming up, and you said the only change that can take place is within the legal framework. The legal framework is only going to be established through Parliament and through legal avenues that we have to take. Those legal avenues are ultimately driven by the vote of the power of vote that we have.
Yes.
And I think that's where we really, really need serious education. And even knowledge is power. We need to empower our viewers with a basic knowledge of how strong we are. But yet at the moment we're divided. What can we do? Which direction we can go in? Inshallah, if we do get the chance, we'll do a part 3 either tomorrow or whenever this panel is available. But Jazakallah for listening. Allah Rabbul Alamin accept our little effort that we are making in raising awareness. Ameen Ya Rabbal Alamin.